Hello, everyone. Welcome to the next episode of Dungeons and Diary, episode 2 at this point. It's been about a month since our last episode because our last session, because we try to go bi weekly, had to be postponed by 2 weeks because two of our players had fallen ill and one of them was being held, not literally hostage at work, but basically was not being allowed to leave until like 3 hours later. So we're postponed for a little bit. Anyways, we finally come into the climactic conclusion for where we left off, where the party of the Legends of Lethargy had arrived at the orc camp, um, originally with the intent of slaying them all to avenge the village that had been destroyed, but after some interesting roles taking place and the party going into a drinking contest to bartering with them to a degree, it started to look like they might be actually on the verge of siding with the orcs, which is when we came to the conclusion of the last session with Khaleesi, the rogue, the assassin rogue for the party, deciding to make an attack roll on the orc chief, and that's where we ended last session. This current session, we finally concluded the roll because since she's an assassin, she gets advantage on her attack rolls if she's surprising a target and if she's going before them in the first round of combat, and any damage applied is automatically a crit. So she finally did her second roll because the first one was a natural 3 and against Orc Chief, which has an armor class of I think it was 16. Yeah, 16. She completely whiffed. But after her second roll, I think it was like a natural 14. So with all of her modifiers, she did an absurd amount of damage on an opening roll. But since the Orc Chief was completely beyond drunk, I mean, he was barely able to he was barely succeeding his constitution checks from just passing out on the floor before this all happened. I had him roll a wisdom check just because since he was grabbing Khaleesi and was taking her to his tent for some action to go down. I rolled to see would he be is he sober or mentally there enough to realize that this was an attack to try to kill him, or was she just roughing him up for some kinky sexual play? And he rolled like shit. So yeah, he actually assumed that this was just foreplay. In which case, the party then was like, "Oh wow, that actually went incredibly well." I mean, I actually think I rolled a natural 1 on his insight check. So it's like, okay then, you actually managed to do like 40 points of damage without any like repercussions. So at this point, though, the rest of the orc camp, so the guards that were within the tent at the time, saw what happened. Even though they're kind of drunk, they're kind of like, "Hey, you okay, Chief?" And I had the players then on a timer basically trying to figure out what they were going to do next because, like, combat will happen. The Chief is drunk and not thinking anything of it, but eventually that pain will overcome, like, any amount of alcohol and like drugs in his system and put him into a blood rage and fight will happen. So eventually the party is trying to organize how they want to get things set up, like, all right, who wants to get the fuck out of the tent, who wants to stay here, so we try to just kill this guy before anything else happens, because the way I have orcs run in my world is that if the leader is dead, the rest of the orcs for the most part won't fight because they rely on the leader. It's kind of how they go. One of the players of the party, though, Nee, the human druid, wanted no part of this. He was actually kind of cool with the orcs. He was like, you know what, I think they're fine and everything. So he actually wandered off into the woods a little distance, managed to get a group of female orcs, due to Izzy, the gnomish bard of the party, doing basically the equivalent of a college student playing Wonderwall in his dorm to attract all the basic bitches. And at this point, even Izzy's like, "Hey, I think there's something going on in the camp right now. This seems to be a bit of commotion." And Niece is like, "All right, you go check on them. I'll stay with the girls." So at this point right now, Izzy's returning to the group. Vondel, the dwarven monk, Khaleesi, the wood elf rogue, and Rourke, the half orc fighter, all decide, all right, let's just before we get literally zerged down because there are like over a dozen orcs here. They have a young green dragon outside who's kind of awaiting for a command. It's like hasn't gone aggressive yet because it doesn't know what's going on. Basically, just They were rolling very well. I was rolling very poorly, and since I roll in the open for the players, I can't really fudge too much on what the rolls actually mean. So the party then go, okay, we're going to attack. Oh, hi Nina. Wow, one of the cats. Here, take a look. That's a cat. Anyways, the party was like, okay, whoops, wrong direction. Let's just try to coup de grace this chief right now. Let's all kill him. Let's all roll for initiative. The orc chief, all the orcs, and the young green dragon all managed to roll the lowest on the initiative. So the entire party got to do their actions before any of the bad guys could. And during that opening round, they managed to actually kill the chief outright. Just burn through, do like 100 damage, kill him off, and I'm like, okay, that actually changes things because an orc chief can actually empower his soldiers considerably if he uses his battle cry, which is a once a day effect. But he never got a chance to, in which case then most of the orcs then were not really in a position to fight anymore because they wanted to flee. A few of them, though, managed to maintain their wisdom checks and be like, no, we need to fight, we need to defend our turf, blah, 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 blah. But it was too few, they're too weak against a bunch of level 5 characters. So within like 2 rounds and whatnot, the party's basically slayed off almost all the orcs, including the chief. And then the dragon finally becomes aware of what's going on and starts to go on the attack. While this is all going on, Nee is still off in the woods, and every one of his turns when he gets to his initiative, he's just rolling performance checks and constitution checks for different sexual actions with these 4 orc women. That was literally all he did for almost the entire session, was basically have sex. Which I'm like, alright. I mean, we'll see how this plays out later when your party members find you. Like, dude, what the fuck were you doing? We were fighting for our lives. What were you doing? But we'll get to that later. So the dragon comes into the fight, does actually some pretty decent damage with his breath attack on the opening, which actually put the fear into the players. They're like, all right, so we just dealt with a bunch of orcs. How bad can a young dragon be? And I'm like, all right, everyone, roll a constitution check. And it's going to be 12d6 poison damage. And like, wait, how many d6 was that? It's 12d6. And it's only a young dragon, so it's not that bad. It's like, you said 12? Yeah, you'll be fine. They all made their saving throws. And again, the dwarven player is naturally resistant to poison, so even though they all took moderate damage, he didn't take that much. It wasn't enough to like drop anyone to like unconscious. Dragon then got some attacks. The party then was taking their turns chipping away at it, realizing, oh, this guy has some pretty decent natural armor class and hits decently hard with his claws and bite. The dwarf decided to hop up onto the dragon, start punching at its wings, trying to immobilize and take out its flight. But this is the one time I've seen this monk player roll so poor. Like, he was missing almost every attack, and he had already burnt almost all of his key points in the earlier fight against the chief and all the other orcs. So he was basically just going off his 2 normal attacks and his bonus action attack, and that's all he had. So they're all fighting, and they're actually managed to do some decent damage. They do over half the dragon's health, at which point I'm like, okay, he, with Gnome on his back, the dwarf on his back, is going to literally just use his turn to fly straight, like, he uses his movement to fly straight up. The half-orc and the gnome, who were right underneath him at the time, took their attacks of opportunity, both missed. And at 80 feet flight speed, it was now out of range of the rogue, who only had daggers for ranged projectiles. The bard was already out of spell slots and couldn't do anything within 60 feet. The half-orc, the fighter, still had his heavy crossbow, so he'll still able to take some shots. But at this point now, I'm like, okay, if the dragon does not get his breath attack within the next turn, which I think I went 2 or 3 turns without any recharge, I'm just going to have him literally just book it out of there, with the dwarf on him or not, because he just saw all the orcs that he knew just get slain. So no breath attack ever recharged. So the dragon then starts dashing at full speed, so 160 flight speed away. The dwarf decides to just fall off, and since he's a monk, fall damage doesn't really apply that much. The party then rejoins back at the camp, trying to, one, find out where Nee went, and second, loot the bodies, loot what's around and everything. So they go find Nee, and the party expressed their hostility towards Nee, and more importantly, the female orcs who are still alive, who are all laying there like completely covered in sweat. Like even though it's only been like maybe 30 seconds to a minute of real time, I mean the way the guy was rolling, the guy was like getting them off within like 10-second intervals. It was crazy. Um, so at this point now, the druid decides to use a spell, one of his spell slots to cast Fog Cloud, so he and the orc women can make a getaway, so they don't get just straight up killed by the party. And he's like, "Why are you guys being so fucking mad? All right, these girls didn't do anything, blah blah blah." And he's like, "And you didn't do anything either. That's the fucking point." Um, so they make it back. The half orc who actually got the killing blow on the orc chief, loots his body and grabs a special. I really should mute my phone when I'm doing this shit. I apologize for that. Uh, Grabs some of the items on the orc chief's body, including a magical great axe on him, which the name was inspired by an episode Critical Role. I'm not sure if it's actually like a relevant item from previous generations of Dungeons and Dragons, but it's a great axe called Vein Eater. It's basically a weaker version. It's not like a legendary item like I've heard it is, so I'm making this more of a nice mediocre to moderate level magic items. Just +1 axe, which when you crit, you add an extra d4 necrotic damage, and whatever damage you deal with necrotic, you heal back onto your character. And since he's a fighter, a champion fighter, he crits more often because natural 19s and 20s count as crit in combat. So it's basically just adding a little chance for some extra necrotic damage and some sustain from doing so. The party then, when they're looting some of the other tents and huts within the encampment, find a bag of holding, an entire tent full of valuable artwork, rugs, linen, tailored items, stuff of that nature. It's stuff that isn't really meant for like military or violent purposes, but it's just stuff that the orcs had looted and just stashed somewhere because they didn't really have a purpose for it, but they knew it was valuable, so they just took it. They also, amongst those items was actually a magic carpet, which the gnome bard actually managed to uh, gain ownership of by actually singing. I can't remember the name of the artist right now, but they actually sing the song "Magic Carpet Ride," not the Aladdin one, but like the '70s rock "Magic Carpet Ride." It was pretty fucking cool. They then went to go speak to Gromesh, who is the last orc left alive in the village, the blacksmith that they actually recruited to start making some brass knuckles for the Vondel, the monk. And they basically explained to him in a pretty threatening way, saying, "Hey, we just killed everyone in your village. I have your chief's axe. When are you going to get those knuckles done? Because that determines whether we kill you or not." And he's just like, "I'll have them ready before dawn." And they're like, "Make it so. We'll leave you be." And that's kind of where we ended the session. Not it was only like a 3-hour session, primarily because I felt like we were at a decent point right there because I didn't know how long combat was going to go because with this group, I can never tell how long sessions can end up going, especially with combat. But I felt like everything had kind of resolved for the right now, and this kind of leaves us at the point that during our next session, the party will wake up, have these brass knuckles, which are going to be, I think, a +1 or +2 to unarmed attacks for a monk. But that's about it. Just an amplifier. That's all it is. And then they go off and try to find a new adventure. And this is literally going to be them finally stepping away entirely from Lost Mines at Fendelver landscape, hopefully, and exploring some new world. Well, not new world, but some new region outside of this area. So that's kind of where we left off. So I'm intrigued to see what decisions the party make. Do they try to go back to Fendelver and try to claim it and rebuild it? Do they just want to stay here at the orc camp and kind of make this a base of operations? Do they just want to wander out somewhere and try to see if some sort of adventure strikes their fancy? I don't know, but we'll find out. Thanks for joining me, and I'll catch you next time.